part of our practice is to recognize our own beauty, our own sovereignty within us, and how that, you know, for many of us, we've been smashed, we've been humiliated, we live with a lot of shame and guilt, but we didn't come in this way. It was learned. That's what's so important, I think, for everybody to understand. This was all learned. And the good news is, it's not good news that you learned it, but the good news is that whatever is learned can be unlearned. And this is why mindfulness and awareness, if there's anything that is going to save us from ourselves in this world, and this affects climate change and being with each other, is more awareness and more love. It's really down to that. And we didn't come in hating one another. We learned this.
Yeah.
You know, like we learned this.
Well, hello everyone. Today is an incredible treat, and I'll be having a conversation with Bob Stahl, and I'll be reading the bio in a moment. But what came up for me, even in just thinking about introducing you, Bob, is you've had such an incredible impact on my life. And this conversation, I just realized maybe it's been about 11 years in the making when I first did a retreat with you in California, a silent retreat. And the way you bring the teachings, mindfulness and wisdom traditions, you just distill it so beautifully, where it's not a theory, it touches the heart. And you've truly impacted me incredibly and supported me in my path. I didn't ever think we'll have this conversation when I first took that retreat, and our paths kept meeting and crossing. So just a really warm welcome to you. And I know this is a treat that will serve many people. So thank you even for taking the time to have this conversation.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here and to have some time with you.
Thank you.
Talk. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to read a bio, which I feel it just barely touches the surface of the depth that you bring and the experience that you have. But I'll just read it, so just those who maybe are not familiar with your work, they'll have a better background. Bob Stahl, PhD, has founded 8 mindfulness-based stress reduction programs in medical centers in San Francisco Bay Area, and is currently offering programs at El Camino Hospital in Mount View in California. He serves as an assistant professor of the practice in the Department of Behavioral and Social Sciences in the School of Public Health at Brown University Mindfulness Center, and formerly at the Oasis Institute for Mindfulness-Based Professional Education and Training at the Center for Mindfulness in Medicine, Healthcare, and Society at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. That's a long title of different things. I had to catch a breath there. Bob teaches MBSR teacher trainings and Insight Mindfulness Meditation retreats worldwide, and is a former guiding teacher at Insight Santa Cruz and a visiting teacher at Spirit Rock and Insight Meditation Society. He is also co-author of 5 books, and I'll be putting the titles of these books in the description of the video below, but I'll just read a couple of them here. A Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Workbook, first and second editions. Living with Heart Wide Open. What a beautiful title. Living with Heart Wide Open. Calming the Rush of Panic. And a Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Workbook for Anxiety. And MBSR Every Day. I'm really curious about all these books too, so maybe we'll come back to those. So I wonder if we can begin, please, just with your story. What brought you to just mindfulness, these teachings of wisdom traditions? What, if we go kind of way back, how did it all start?
Yeah, thank you. And Yeah, I always like to frame that my journey started when I was 4 years old. And yeah, I can still remember it. I was riding in the back seat of my parents' car going down Corey Hill Road to
Mm,
my Nana's house to visit. And, I'm not sure if my parents were talking about death, though I don't recall that. But what I do recall is that I was sitting in the back seat
mm,
and I had this very clear realization and understanding that I was going to die, that everyone was going to die, and
mm,
that it could happen at any time.
mm.
And in a childlike way, of course, I was a child. I was 4 years old, and I think
Yeah.
I named this to my mother and father as we were driving along. And I remember my mother turning to me to reach out with perhaps some comfort in her intention and saying, "Oh, don't worry, Bobby. It's not going to happen for a long, 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 long time." And I could sense that there was care in her voice, and wanting to um, have me not worry.
Mm,
And but yet I also knew with that realization that I don't know what a long, 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 long time was, but what I did know was that it could happen at any moment. So I didn't feel like the full truth was being offered to me there.
mm.
And though I didn't hold it with resentment or anything, but it's probably very difficult. I'm now a father, and I remember with my young children asking me about death, and how would I try to talk with them honestly and caringly, and not denying or trying to make them feel just comfortable. And it was very powerful talking with my kids about death at an early age when it came up for them. And so that was a moment in time when I realized it was not going to last.
Mm.
And that was a very striking moment. And for anyone watching this video, it's interesting for each of us to reflect upon when was the first moment that you realized you were going to die. And I've sometimes asked this at retreats, and
Mm.
some people raise their hands, they actually do remember the moment, some people don't. And then I always kind of leave a joke saying, "Well, if you don't know, I'm sorry to break the news to you, but you're going to die." And that's just how it is. And but it was a powerful moment for me to realize that it wasn't going to last. And the universe compounded that realization and truth that by the time I was 4 years old, and by the time I was 9,
Mm.
I also had some major deaths happen in my life of a younger brother who died of Tay-Sachs disease, and I shared a room with him.
Oh,
And
wow.
he died when he was a little bit over 1 years old.
Mm.
And then my best friend, who I played with every day, Ellen Chabot was her name, and she went into a diabetic coma one night and died. And then my grandfather, who lived downstairs, we had a two-family house, and my grandparents lived below, and my grandfather died one night of a heart attack. And so this all happened between the ages of 4 and 9, and it really, it had a deep impact. It was years that I could realize later, looking back, that what a impact that it had on my
Yeah.
life, and with trauma, with grief. And I think because of that, I was kind of a different kid in the school. I was picked on a lot as well, and I was very sensitive because being picked on and realizing that it's painful when someone picks on you. I
Um,
tried to really be very careful to never pick or never hurt anyone, but I would also see other kids getting picked on. So there's like some sensitivity of this suffering in the world, though I was
mm,
also very lost. And as I was growing up, this was in the outside of Boston in the 1960s, and there was a lot of turbulence happening with civil rights, Vietnam War,
yeah.
psychedelics and everything. And I was very, very lost and confused. And so this just went on, and I was actually, there was a lottery for the draft, and I fortunately got a very high draft number, so I wasn't going to be drafted into the war. And then fortunately 6 months later the war ended.
This is
But
Vietnam.
I was just Vietnam War,
Yeah.
So I was very lost and very confused, and didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't even think about college. I was working. I was in high school. I barely was able to graduate, and I was working in a chicken restaurant. And after I graduated school, I didn't even think about college or anything like that. And my parents, I don't remember them asking me about wanting to go to college either, though I don't quite remember fully. But a friend of mine said, "Hey, I'm going to do a 5th year of high school to try to get into a college. You want to do it with me?" And so I said, "All right, I'll," because I was just working in a chicken restaurant. But well, maybe I'll try that. And then the more I thought about it was, I would love to go to like somewhere in northern New England, because I got introduced to skiing and I love skiing. And so I wanted to go to a college near ski areas. And so after this 5th year of high school, I applied for college in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. I'm glad that there's still kingdoms around in the world. They're called the Northeast. Went to a state college called Linden State College. It was right near Brook Mountain, a ski area, very good skiing. And so I went off to this place in northern Vermont. I had no idea what I was getting into, but I knew they had a ski area. And for the first 2 years, I majored in skiing.
You were clear.
Majored in skiing, getting drunk, getting high, using drugs, and trying to have girlfriends. And so that's what I did for the first 2 years.
Yeah.
And then at the end of 2 years, I got a little envelope from the school, and I opened it up, and it said that I had flunked out. And my parents, of course, were very upset, and I was upset, but I was like just so lost and confused, it just didn't even really faze me too much. But my parents were really upset and said, let's see if you can try to get readmitted, and really want you to try to do something. It was so upsetting. And so, okay, I said, all right, I'll try to get readmitted. So I was, and then the course calendar schedule came out of classes, and my mother and father were saying, "Well, isn't there something there that would be of interest to you?" And I had all this reading, writing, arithmetic, history, science, and it's all good fields, all good subjects, and so forth. But I wasn't interested in any of that. Like it just didn't. I mean, they're all wonderful areas of study, but I didn't realize at the time just how lost and confused. That's how lost and confused I was. And so anyways, my mother said, please look in this schedule. And so I started looking through the offering of classes, and all of a sudden something came to me that like, oh, what's this? It had Wisdom of the East, it said, was the name of the course. Then there was a colon after that, and I couldn't even pronounce the words at the time. It was Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and Zen. I couldn't even pronounce them. I didn't even know what they were. But there was something about the Wisdom of the East that drew me, and this was my former experiences. There was something even as a child, I've been fascinated with the East, with Eastern wisdom, and also the food. Like my parents would go to Chinese restaurants, and I loved going there. Not only the food, but just the environment was very different than like a standard American restaurant. Something about it. And there was occasionally, like on television, there was stories that had there's something about Eastern wisdom that drew me. And so I decided I'll take this course. And I didn't know that course was going to change my life. And so I remember going to the first class, and I was very surprised as soon as I entered into the room, because my professor was in jeans and was sitting on top of his desk in a full lotus position.
That's different, right?
never had a professor like this before. I mean, usually they're suit jacket and tie and they're sitting behind their desk and they're kind of scary. But this person was like meeting each person, eye contact with them, welcoming each person, shaking their hands. And I had never this was really unusual. And there was something about his rapport, something about how he held himself. It was like, this person's different. And so he had us begin to read the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. And,
you started very light.
that was the first thing that we were to study, is Tao way of life. It's just this very small book of 81 different poems or epigrams. But I started reading these, and I couldn't believe that somebody thought about life in this way. I'd never been exposed to any type of literature or philosophy or way of looking at life, and it was profound to me. It was also some of the wisdoms were perplexing. Like, what did Lao Tzu is the writer of the Tao Te Ching, what did he mean by this? But it was so earth-based and so wise. I was drawn into the Tao deeply. And then I came across this epigram number 47, and I read it over and over again, trying to figure out what did Lao Tzu mean. It was something about this, I'm paraphrasing, there's no need to look outside your window, for everything you need to know is inside you. And I read this over and over and over again. What did Lao Tzu mean by this? There's no need to look outside the window. Everything you need to know is inside you. And so I just stayed with this, as I had with other epigrams, but this one really drew me. Like, what did he mean? And then gradually I began to understand what Lao Tzu meant when he said, there's no need to look outside your window, for everything you need to know is inside you. That if I want to know something about my life, I need to look inside myself. I had never thought about that in my entire life up to that moment. There was this moment where all of a sudden I understood that. And I realized just how lost. I was so lost and so confused. I didn't even know how lost and confused I was, because that's how lost and confused I was. I was just so lost. But then there was this moment like, oh, if I want to know something, I have to look inwards. This was the beginning of my journey. More formally, then I began to learn meditation. And that led to, that's another whole story that I maybe won't belabor right now. Living in a Buddhist monastery for a number of years and practicing. But it began with that moment of, this journey of being lost, and then Lao Tzu awakening. If I wanted to know something, I need to look in here. That was the beginning. So that's kind of the long version of what brought me to this practice. Which led me to Vipassana, or insight meditation, with a Burmese meditation teacher named Rina Sirkar. It was my first Vipassana teacher that led me to meet her teacher, Venerable Tampu Lucero, who was a forest monk in Burma, that I went to Burma and practiced and ordained temporarily in his monastery, and then brought him back with a group of people to the United States. So we founded the Tongpulu Kabari Monastery in Boulder Creek, California, where I lived for 8.5 years, practicing not as a monk, but as caring for the monks and practicing very intensively.
What a pull of the heart. And as you're describing, is a clear, there's this kind of stream that you followed the heart. And, I really appreciate when you're describing this looking within, which is such a challenge in this day and age, where we're looking for all the answers outside, right? It's our devices, it's the TV, it's everything external, others. And here's the wisdom pointing right over here.
Yeah, there's this beautiful quote by Carl Jung. He may have borrowed it from Lao Tzu, but we're always borrowing wisdom from somewhere or learning it for ourselves. But he has this beautiful pithy quote that says, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." Yeah, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. This, Yeah, and I can notice yesterday for a rare moment, I had nothing to do for a few hours.
Hmm.
There's this rare moment. It's lovely. And I could see all these things of wanting to do to fill up the space. But then I was like, why don't I, could I just sit here for a little bit and not fill it up doing something?
Hmm.
Stay right here with my breath, with my body, with my sadness, with my joy, with my fears, with my love. Just to be here. So
Hmm.
easy to go fill the space with something else. Much more difficult to sit with ourselves.
Hmm.
Learning how to, and that's I think what meditation is about, is learning how to sit with ourselves,
Hmm.
sit inside our skin rather than crawling in it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can be for some people a little scary to look within if they haven't.
Yeah, that's right.
It's sometimes we don't want to meet aspects of ourselves, and we kind of deny ourselves the ability to heal with different parts within us.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really curious your thoughts on, a lot of people who either have practiced or have never practiced, and, they may practice and stop. They say, oh, I don't have time. I'm too busy. Like you're sharing. Um, it's very hard for us. We're such doers, especially in this North American culture. We just find a sense of self by doing. We get praise for the doing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what do you say in terms of what are some benefits of even taking the time? And I know you did a lot of work with mind body medicine and MBSR, and there's a lot of science behind it too. So I'd just love to hear your thoughts on why is this even worth it to take the time when we're busy?
Yeah, it's a good question. And yeah, we were born human beings, and for so many, we've become this human doings.
Mm.
And but in doing for what? I mean, no doubt we have to. We need, depending on where you live, you need a shelter, you need food, you need medicine, you need clothes. And actually, in the monastic world, these are called the four requisites of life. You need
Mm.
these things to live. But we can get very grandiose with the residence that we live in, and the food that we have, and the clothing that we wear, and all these things. And so how much do we need? And will what we want really give us that lasting happiness? And
Mm.
and I mean, I'm not against the pleasures of life, and I have my own pleasures. I got my wonderful coffee mug here, and sitting in a nice chair, and talking on a computer. I'm living in a small but nice house, and feel very lucky, and feel very privileged to also worked hard for the labor of my heartfelt work.
Mm.
But it's also like, I think the deeper question is, as human beings, uh, what is our deepest longings,
Mm.
and and happiness, and where is it to be found? Is it inside? Is it outside? So I remember once an engineer who had taken a class with me at, I actually work in the heart of Silicon Valley, El Camino
Mm.
Hospital in Mountain View. This is like the homes of so many of these amazing internet companies and
Mm.
software and so forth. I mean, this is the Silicon Valley major hospital, El
Hub.
Camino. And this is where I've worked for close to 30 years.
Mm.
Actually, in 2023 will be my 30th year at El Camino Hospital teaching MBSR.
Mm.
And but I remember early on this engineer taking my class, and he was sharing about what brought him here. And he goes, well, what brought me here is that, when I was young, people said, be smart, that will help you to be successful. So I was smart, and I got good grades. And then people said, become an engineer, that's where you'll make some good money. And so I became an engineer. And then people said, then you engineer, you make good money, you can get a nice house. I got a nice house. Then people said, like, well, you can also get another house in Tahoe and get a boat. And so I got a house in Tahoe, I got a boat, and it goes on, and I got all this stuff, but I have no idea who I am. And that's why I'm here. And so that's kind of an extreme and dramatic tale, but it was always one that just stuck to me deeply. And no doubt we need to do things, we need to have our stuff to survive. But this deepest, like, what is happiness? And where is it to be found? Is it inside? Is it outside? Is it through what we have or who we are? And so I know this is a longer winded response. There may be a value to stop a little bit at times, to take a few breaths, as we say, to observe what's going on in our body, our mind, our heart. And so there's balances, there's wisdom. We can get so lost in the doing that we forget to see who we are and what are we really longing for, and will this and that really fulfill that need for happiness.
I really relate to that story, this chasing, which is part of what led me to this practice, chasing. Start from high school, my happiness, I just got to get out of here, and then I got to get into school, and then I got to get into this university and this job, and next, and it never arrived. I never arrived, and until really I struggled, and I had to go on this disability from work about 20 years ago. It just forced me to pause and go, why am I so unhappy? I should be happy. Like, I'm living in an incredible place. Everything's safe, secure. This is not making sense. So I did a lot of this. Here's my struggle because of this history that I had, or this trauma I've had. Like, I had my own things, but I just slowly realized there's something that I can do to influence my own well-being, stop this chase, and
that's a powerful.
It really was to realize, wait, what can I do different?
Yeah.
And that's really what made me fall in love with MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. It makes it so accessible for everyone to taste change, how it's possible, how it's not just, they don't have to go to a monastery somewhere, they don't have to travel, you know what I mean? They can have their life, but learn the skills. And I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about that for those who don't know what this, it sounds so good, this mindfulness-based stress reduction. And you've had so much experience in teaching it over decades. And what even led you to it? I'm curious, that story, that backstory.
Being a mindfulness practitioner, I had heard about MBSR from an ex-monk friend of mine. But maybe preceding that after living in the monastery and leaving the monastery, I needed to work. I hadn't worked in about 10 years. And I was fortunate enough to get a job as a counselor at what was called the Cabrillo College Stroke Center. And it was particularly working with people living that had stroke, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, other orthopedic and neurological conditions. And part of my job as a counselor was to teach relaxation classes and some administrative things, some counseling. And within the stress reduction classes, I taught mindfulness. And I would hear people anecdotally saying to me that this is very helpful. For example, there was this old woman that was saying, yeah, this mindfulness stuff is keeping me out of the nursing home. And when I asked more about what do you mean, she goes, well, look at me, I'm an old lady, I got to get up in the middle of the night and I got to pee and I got to walk to the toilet. And so I get out of bed, I get in my walker, and then I'm mindful of lifting, moving, placing. I'm being mindful of walking as I walk to the toilet, and so then I'm not going to fall down and end up breaking my hip and end up in a convalescent home. And so she was just commenting on like how important it is to be present to what's going on, and people that didn't have maybe the use of their right arm and their right leg, and beginning to reconnect with it, with awareness and honoring the emotions that came up, beginning to become more connected to their own mind and body, and in some sense of reconnecting. So I'd hear different anecdotal stories, and I shared this with an ex-monk friend of mine, and he sent me this book called Full Catastrophe Living that was just published. And so I read this. He said, take a look at this book. This guy's doing something very interesting in University of Massachusetts Medical School. And so I read this book, and I couldn't believe that, by Jon Kabat-Zinn, Full Catastrophe Living, that somebody created a whole program using mindfulness for working with people with stress, pain, and illness. And so I wrote him a letter just thanking him for the book, and shared a little bit about me working at a stroke center, and also just, saying mindfulness is really helpful in healthcare. And I was very influenced by Ram Dass and Stephen Levine, who were also bringing meditation into healthcare. So that was part of it. And then working now at the stroke center. And about 2 weeks later, I got this surprise call from Jon Kabat-Zinn, thanking me for the letter that I wrote, and inviting me to come to University of Massachusetts Medical Center to check out their program. And so, as I had mentioned, I come from the Boston area. And I just had already arranged to visit with my parents about 2 months from then. So I let John know that I'm going to be actually in Boston in a couple of months, and I'll come out to Worcester, and I'd love to meet you all. And so they said, yeah, please come. So a day was arranged, and I went out there and met them, and Saki and Florence, and Melissa, and a few others, Alana, Ferris, and I couldn't believe what they're doing. It's like, wow, like this in a medical center, like doing mindfulness. And I was sharing with John that, I'd like to try to begin to do something out in California. And he goes, well, knowing my background, he said, just go ahead and do it. And the curriculum is in Full Catastrophe Living. And if you have any questions, give us a call.
Dive deep into water right away.
There's no teacher training. That didn't happen until 1993, which I was actually in the very first teacher training at Omega after the Bill Moyer series came out in 1993, that people really wanting to get involved. But so that was my humbling beginning. My very first class that I ever taught was at the Cabrillo College Stroke Center in 1991. And I've been involved working with many people living with stress, pain, and illness. And it's very interesting. The word mindfulness-based stress reduction, that's quite a mouthful. That's why we say MBSR. But I think there's a couple of very good questions that one would want to know about this program. And so the first question is, what is mindfulness? And the second question is, how does mindfulness relate to stress reduction? Because this is some type of a mindfulness-based stress reduction program. And so, mindfulness has its early roots in Buddhist meditative disciplines, but it's not just for Buddhists. It's for anyone that wants to be present. It's this ability to be here now, as the saying goes, to be aware of what's arising in your body and in your mind. Because the more that we're aware of what's going on, the more information we have. This leads into stress reduction and mediation. That as human beings, we can become creatures of such conditioning, such habitual conditioning, reactivity. And so as we become mindful, we become aware of reactivity, ways that I'm reacting to situations that are actually throwing more fuel in the fire to keep it burning. But as we become mindful, if you will, we can see that we have a choice. This is this beautiful quote from Viktor Frankl, that between the stimulus and the response, there is a space. And in that space lies my freedom to choose. That we can actually, as we become more mindful, rather than following that reactive pattern, we can take a pause. We can notice something new, that we have a choice. There's this old teaching story about autobiography in 5 short chapters, or in chapter 1, you're walking down a street, there's a deep hole in the sidewalk, you fall in. In chapter 2, you again fall in again. Chapter 3, it becomes a habitual pattern. This is what I do. I just walk down the street and I fall in a hole. This is what I do. But in chapter 4, as you become more mindful, I can begin to walk around the hole. Chapter 5, I can walk down another street. That I can begin to, once I become aware of these patterns, I can begin to potentially respond to them in more wiser ways. So we speak about the difference between reactivity that is fueled by these old unconscious habitual patterns and conditioning. And as we become mindful, I can respond in wiser ways. So mindfulness-based stress reduction. As I become aware, it helps me to provide greater choice to respond rather than react to the challenges of life. And to learn about ourselves, to learn about our own inner conditioning, like that. There's this voice inside us that's saying, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. And you realize that you've been living with a tyrant for years.
Yeah.
And you never even realized that you had this tyrant because you're just lost in the story of I, me, and my. But now you're becoming aware and seeing how these messages that I have somehow learned through my years of living. But now that I'm becoming aware of what I've learned, maybe I can begin to unlearn part of this. Maybe I can even begin to unlearn a lot of things. This condition. So anyways.
So habitual, this conditioning, like in terms of thinking, in terms of behaving, and you know, how you're describing it, it's so true. We get kind of imprisoned in our own mind because that's what we hear. And we just typically just go with it because that's what the mind is saying. So there isn't as much space to really question the truth of thoughts.
The self-referencing, and then of course those that we're around with, they reinforce this who you think you are, because this is who you are. This is like this old funny story of a person went to a physical therapist because they had a bum knee, and the physical therapist helped this person to restore and be able to walk well. And one day they had a session, and then it was lunchtime, and so the session ended and the patient left, and then the therapist went just a few minutes later down outside to go get a sandwich around the corner, and happened to see his patient across the street all walking all like weird again, like limping, and yet the patient has been wonderful in session. And so finally, when the patient came back, the physical therapist asked him, "What's going on? You've been doing so well. Then I saw you walking with somebody across the street the other day when I went out for lunch after our session, and you were limping again." And the patient said, "Well, you know, no one would recognize me. This is one of my family members. No one would recognize me any other way. That's just kind of like the way things are." So sometimes it's, this habitual conditioning, and it's supported by those around us. So we're lost in self-referencing, and the power of when we begin to develop self-awareness, which is very different than self-referencing. But the referencing is all that we know, because we were born, and you know, I'm lucky enough to have a grandchild now along the way, and but it's so amazing being around these young infants and toddlers that are so impressionable because they're developing their sense of self. And so we learn from our environment, we develop the sense of self. And if we're lucky enough, we begin to become aware of who this self is that we've developed, individuated into. And then perhaps we can begin to unindividuate who it is that we've individuated into. As we grow with more awareness, we begin to see this, you know, I used the word tyrant earlier, which is probably appropriate, of this voice inside us. It's a critic, there's a judge, it's comparing, it's all these things. And so as we become aware of these stories that we believe to be true about ourselves, and you know, and it's powerful, these stories that we believe to be true about ourselves, because in our own minds we feel like we've gone to the courthouse, the jury and the judge and the lawyers, they've all presented the evidence, and you have a life sentence of being unworthy, despicable, damaged goods, whatever it is that somehow you believe this to be true, and you have the evidence and proof in our mindfulness practices helping us to see that that may not be so true. These beliefs and identifications and conditioning and narratives and stories may not be the whole picture. but we may not know that
Mm.
because we're so lost in the story of I, me, and mine.
Mm. And the story feels very fixed in our mind, like this is who I am, and it becomes, we become attached to it even if it's not serving us.
That's right.
It's like a jacket that doesn't fit anymore, and it's like, well, that's what I got.
That's right.
We're stuck in it, and yeah.
So that to me is one of the most powerful things in our mindfulness practice and mindfulness-based stress reduction. Like, begin to see that these stories that I've identified with are maybe not the whole story. That maybe that this one that has been so uncompassionate with oneself can begin to meet oneself with greater compassion, to begin to see through some of these stories and narratives that you believe to be so true that you're recognizing maybe are not as true as I had believed them to be.
Mm.
Maybe I'm actually okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I, that in the story of feeling that I've just been separate, all of a sudden I'm beginning to feel connected. As I breathe in and breathe out, I'm realizing this air that I'm breathing is a gift from the plant world, and my exhalation is this carbon dioxide is supporting and nourishing the sense of the plant world. So the sense of connection and interconnection.
Mm.
We begin to see the conditioning of separation and bias and prejudice and all the different ways that we separate ourselves from each other.
Mm.
We can begin to heal our hearts,
Mm.
see through some of the stories that have held us hostage.
Mm.
And perhaps, to be able to meet our life, our stress, our illness, our pain in wiser ways. I think part of it is the acknowledgement that, the stress rate is one per person, the death rate is one per person, the illness rate is one per person. But how do we meet it in a wiser way,
Mm.
in a more compassionate and loving way?
Mm. This changing relationship, as you're sharing this turning to a more compassionate way, changing relationship we have with ourselves, then begins to transform relationship with others.
That's right.
And something that I hear often, people who haven't began mindfulness or meditation wonder, oh, it's kind of selfish, take time for me. I'd rather spend this time taking care of others. It's I could be doing emails, and it's like, wow, what's missed?
Yeah.
Because what I've discovered and what you're sharing, it's the opposite. Going within is to help us connect and be more in the world, influence change, including biases and injustices, racism, like things we get to see now, our own conditioning. Like, wow. Yeah.
And this is radical. I just get a wave of goosebumps just as you share this. And because when when I'm hanging out with my grandson, like, he has not yet learned prejudice. He doesn't know anything about skin color as far as prejudice or gender identity or sexual orientation or ethnicity or political affiliation or the A through Z and beyond. He has not yet learned that. But yet that will be learned because it's conditioning and we're all doing, of course, the best that we can, but there's a lot that we can do. There's a lot that we can do.
Yeah.
Why, like when we bring about bringing mindfulness with our children, and the beautiful work of Nancy Bardacke with mindfulness-based childbirth and parenting, that, the sense of how do we preserve our children's sovereignty? How do we meet them with empathy, with compassion, with acceptance? These are all very important parts, because if as young people, at times we came in fully sovereign, here I am world, like I don't even care what people think about me. I can poop and pee and throw up and yell and cry, laugh right in front of you, and I don't even care what you think. This is like a baby, like they're so sovereign. But then what happens? We get shamed, we get humiliated, we get to feel small, and we lose that sense of our sovereignty. And so this is part of our practice is to recognize our own beauty, our own sovereignty within us, and how that, for many of us, we've been smashed, we've been humiliated, we live with a lot of shame and guilt, but we didn't come in this way. It was learned. That's what's so important, I think, for everybody to understand. This was all learned. And the good news is, it's not good news that you learned it, but the good news is that whatever is learned can be unlearned. And this is why mindfulness and awareness, if there's anything that is going to save us from ourselves in this world, and this affects climate change and being with each other, is more awareness and more love. It's really down to that. And we didn't come in hating one another. We learned this.
Yeah.
We learned this. And it's interesting, when you look at a human being, a lot of the scientific evidence says that we're actually 99.99% the same. There's a very small fraction that has some differences. But yet what's happened? Skin color, with ethnicity and everything. And again, our kids can show us. They can show us that we didn't come in this way. So what is learned can be unlearned.
That feels hopeful. That really feels hopeful. Which is really, instead of being fixed, like this is how it's going to be, who knows 100 years from now, if there's more love, compassion, awareness, what the world would be like. And it doesn't mean inaction. Sometimes people misunderstand mindfulness or compassion as just going to sit on the bench and just going to become this doormat to the world and just accept everything. And that's such a misconception. It's just awakening to truths in our life, awakening to how we are, kind of practically. It's very practical.
Yeah, and making choices towards constructive change. And so there's even the wise social action that may be necessary to help heal the world. And in Buddhist psychology, they speak about that the deepest source of sufferings is ignorance that leads to greed and to hatred. And this practice of mindfulness is counteracting that. It's helping to, as we grow with more awareness, and we can see more clearly the places we're holding on to or pushing away, the places we're grasping and wanting and having aversion. So it's a deep work. It's a deep work, and it's not just about sitting around and letting things happen. As we become aware and wake up, we may implement choices that are much wiser and more helpful. And not only am I working on my own self, but then as I begin to change, and maybe I become less resentful and more forgiving, and bringing more understanding where people are, that my relationship with others begin to change. So it may start individually, it may start collectively, it may even begin to shape systemically, institutionally, but it begins first inside us. So this is old folk song I love that says, "Let there be peace on earth, let it begin with me." But that's a very powerful political statement. And who knows, as one begins to make more peace, it affects the family, affects the community, perhaps in time, the systems, the institutions. So this is very serious and very important work. As we begin to dissolve some of the prejudice and bias that we have, that this is huge, and it begins to spread wider.
There's the web of humanity. When you described it as spreading this, realizing we're just not these isolated, beings. We're part of this web of humanity. And it's so beautiful when people begin to awaken. I find it the most, there's such sweetness when people awaken to their truth of, I actually am not broken the way I thought I was. I'm broken. Which is the whole really perspective of MBSR. This, you're whole and complete with everything as you are. And something so sweet when people arrive being home in their own skin, like I'm okay as I am. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think not connecting with a humanity, and then I'm connecting with this world that has got too hot, and abusing nature, and beginning to develop deeper respect. And how do we live with this world in a way that can bring some more balance? So the whole issue of climate change and so forth, that there's powerful implications.
Mm.
Because it's very interesting. Carl Sagan, an astronomer, he was able to pull up this picture from the satellite Voyager in Pluto, looking back to planet Earth, and that picture, it's called the pale blue dot. It's like this little speck of dust suspended in a sunbeam. That's what our Earth looks like from Pluto. And but he goes on to just reflect upon this very humbling picture, that it appears that there's no one to save us from ourselves. That as you look out into the vastness of space, there's no one here that's going to come and help us. And we really need to take responsibility to help ourselves, and to help end hatred and selfishness. And there's enough for everyone.
Yeah.
And there's enough, and not an homogenized world, a world that celebrates its rainbows of ethnicity and culture. It's very challenging times that we're living in. And this is why it's very interesting how that, like from an historical point of view, in the last 40 plus years, how mindfulness has exponentially spread in the secular realm. I mean, no doubt it's been pervasive in the Buddhist realm, but it's even in the world realm now more than it's ever been before. And so it gives me some hope.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there's a lot of counter forces of people are scared. And so how do we find our shared humanity with those that don't maybe have the same look that I have of this world? And so how do we bring us together? Because underneath it all, there's fear. And how do we begin to cultivate our shared humanity? This us and them has got to dissolve.
Yeah. The separation. Yeah. And it seems to start at the dissolving of a separation we have of ourselves.
Yeah.
Dissolving even the hating aspects of ourselves, pushing away things, not wanting to look at things. And it just reminded me of the many books that you have about panic and anxiety. And in my work and counseling as my clinical work as a psychologist, this comes up a lot, and how prevalent it is, anxiety and depression. And the more people push things away, especially with anxiety, the more panic gets stronger. The more we push it and hate it and resist it, the more it kind of. So I wonder, I'm just curious about that in terms of some of those elements from your book. And I'll be putting the description of the book below for people. They can get the book to get the whole detail, but just a couple of things in terms of working. Like, how does mindfulness help with this anxiety, this panic?
I'll share a story that it was a revelation for me when I was about 16. And growing up in New England and Boston area, there's a lot of snow in the winter, and I got my driver's license, and and inevitably I would get into skids in the snow because it's icy roads or whatever, and getting into a skid is not comfortable because you're losing control of the wheel. You're out of control, so it's very scary. And And my impulse was to turn away from the skid, and I would just skid out more. And I remember once sharing this with my father, and my father said to me, Bob, if you want to get out of the skid, you got to turn your wheels towards it. And when I heard that, it sounded so counterintuitive. Like, I don't want to turn towards the skid. I want to get away from the skid. So I think it scared me what he said, and I didn't believe him. And so I kept on turning away and kept on skidding out. And I'll never forget this one day. I was getting into a skid again, and I said, all right, my father said this, even though it seems counterintuitive, I just eensy beensy little bit turned my wheels towards the skid as I was skidding, and I could feel my car beginning to assert, trying to straighten. And it was a powerful revelation to me. And I felt it was like a seed that was planted. Actually, I wanted to call the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Workbook Turning into the Skid, but the publisher said, well, people that don't live in snow, they won't know that. They won't understand what you're talking about. It's people that don't live in snow areas.
Right.
So becoming a Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Workbook. But that's, I share that story in the book, but it was a revelation, right? It's counterintuitive. But what that teaching taught me of my father is that not only if I turn my steering wheel into the skid when I'm in snow, skidding out, but also what about turning into my fear, turning into my pain, turning into what's uncomfortable, and that was the way to find balance and meaning and wisdom. And I want to just acknowledge, for so many of us, it's so counterintuitive because we live in a culture that is in such denial of pain. I'm always amused. It's called health insurance, but it's actually sickness insurance. It's called life insurance, but it's actually death insurance. It's like, so much emphasis is on entertainment and medication and doing whatever you can so you don't have to feel the pain. But the pain is part of life. But how do we begin to meet it more wisely? And sometimes there is the proper use of taking medication and so forth. Don't get me wrong. But, there's this time where my son, I was with him and he gonked his head going down some steps. He was maybe about 7 years old and 5 years old, I should say. And he was crying. And a friend of mine came up and pulled a candy bar out of his pocket and said, here, little boy, have this candy bar. You'll be better. And I said to my friend, please don't give him that candy. And we'll catch up to you. Meanwhile, my son's crying and I'm attending to him. Then another friend came and started making some funny gestures, trying to make him laugh. And I said, please, don't try to make him laugh. He conked his head. It hurts. We'll catch you in a little bit. And so I just sat with my son and he said, Daddy, it really hurts when you conk your head. And I said, it does hurt. It helped him to validate his experience, to acknowledge, yes, it's hurt. You feel pain when you conk your head. And so he cried and did what he did. And I just gave him space to feel and allow and acknowledge it. And then at a certain point, he said, all right, Dad, I'm ready to go now. Let's go home. And then it was beautiful because then later, like he didn't have to reprocess this. It was like it was finished at the steps. And so how do we begin to meet pain, anxiety? And so the importance of it in mindfulness practice of acknowledging it. There's actually a longer poem. It's called Unconditional by Jennifer Payne Wellwood, but there's a punchline in the middle of the poem that really speaks to this. She says, whatever you flee from, it will pursue you. Whatever you welcome will begin to transform. And so this is what we're trying to work with in our practice. Rather than, whatever I'm fleeing from, it keeps on coming back. I push it away, it keeps on coming back. Pushing it away, it keeps on coming back. The thing is that it's coming back because it actually does want to get completed. It does want to get, the human body is designed to come back into equilibrium. But if we keep on pushing it away, it doesn't get back into equilibrium. But then the wisdom of the body is it keeps on coming back again. It keeps on coming back again. But what if we actually, when it came back, rather than pushing it away, allow and acknowledge to feel what there is to feel? That's the transformation. Just like letting my son feel his pain and gradually in time. All right, let's go, Dad. I'm done now. And so what's it like to begin to turn into the fear, turn into the pain? And I also want to be trauma sensitive here. Sometimes we're just treading what, we're just doing whatever we can to survive. Sometimes it's wise times to turn into these feelings and acknowledging them. Sometimes I'm just doing the best that I can, and maybe another time when I'm feeling more safe and stable,
Yeah.
and that I begin to meet some of these areas. And so I can dip my toes into the cold water and dip them out. Perhaps in time I can begin to acclimate. But also I just want to the sensitivity of trauma, not wanting to further activate. But often at a certain point, we may need to meet these places, but with support and with
Mm.
help, that
Mm.
we can transform ourselves. And it's been true in my own life. Whatever I flee from, and I've traveled all over the world, it follows me everywhere I go.
Yeah.
But whatever I begin to welcome, it begins to transform me.
Mm. Yeah, there's such a moving, gentle moving towards when you're describing, turning to this skid, this leaning into, not pushing it. And I've really appreciated that in teaching in mindfulness and MBSR, and experienced your retreats. It's very it's so honoring where people are at. There's no forcing. There's so much permission giving to allow space to heal. Like this whole notion of healing was the way that mindfulness described it. I know John Kabat-Zinn speaks about that, this coming to terms, like healing, coming to terms. That really was such a paradigm shift in my mind.
Yeah.
It's not about this fixing. It's not about this curing, because it's not this broken thing. Is how do we come to terms, whether it's grief or anxiety or pain or injustice? Like how do we be with that so we can transform it?
Yeah.
That's a quite powerful shift in paradigm.
Yeah. And I think, I fully agree. And I think, like, even in the practice of meditation, people can have an idea that meditation is about accepting what's happening, somehow being okay with it. It's not easy to come into terms with the way things are, but we're
Yeah.
developing our wisdom and our compassion to be able to meet that. And sometimes I find, just to separate the language, that in meditation practice, we're not necessarily inviting us to accept what's happening, because some situations that are happening might be unacceptable. But
Right.
could I actually acknowledge? So I like to use the word acknowledge. I'm going to acknowledge how unacceptable it is.
Mm.
But the very fact that we're beginning to acknowledge what's present, even if it's hard, is very different. That's knowledge. It's
Mm.
very different when we're just lost in the perseveration of that reactivity. But it's another thing when we become aware and acknowledge, oh, I'm feeling a lot of sadness. Oh, I'm feeling anger. I'm feeling scared. And this
Mm.
acknowledgement is a wisdom, and it will assist us in potentially coming back into balance, because we're no longer in denial.
Yeah.
We're acknowledging what's here.
Yeah.
That can be very healing. Even
Mm.
acknowledging that right now it's unacceptable. I'm acknowledging how unacceptable it feels to me,
Mm.
and I can meet it with wisdom.
There's so much ease with that as you say that. There isn't a force like I have to accept and like.
Mm,
I don't have to like whatever it is. You mentioned grief, and took me back to, for me, the loss of my father, and
mm,
acceptance for a while just felt really like, no, I don't want to accept what's happening here, but
mm. Yeah,
it's I don't have to like. I mean, I don't like what happened, and how do I hold space in my heart over the years that really allowed the healing
yeah,
of his passing,
yeah,
and so many others, were loss of friends and family, and um, not liking, but like you're saying so beautifully, acknowledging and working with.
yeah. And honoring it, honoring.
Uh,
As a family member says, who lost her daughter, how are some people ask her, how you doing? Goes, I continue to walk it out.
yeah,
I'm walking it out.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, this feels spacious when you say that.
Mm.
because often with grief, we're supposed to get over it quickly, right? Like
Yeah.
it's been a week, finish, move on, or there's a taking
Yeah.
some leave from work for 2 weeks. Okay, the time has passed, move on, and it's grief doesn't work that way.
No.
The more we resist it.
Yeah. It's
Uh,
be honored, and it's a journey of a lifetime, not just a couple of weeks or a month.
yeah, yeah.
But I find that by honoring it, it supports integration, whereby not honoring it and turning away from it. But maybe also at the same time, that's what one needs to do to survive, because it's just too
Mm,
darn painful. But there may come a time when it will be important to be acknowledged,
yeah.
to be integrated.
Mm. When you shared earlier about your living in a monastery for 8+ years, I'm curious what drew you to do that, and what was life like after that? Like that's
Mhm.
what.
Yeah, I I got into the insight meditation for Vipassana practice, and I'll never forget, after my first retreat, it was like coming home. It was like, oh, this, for me personally, this was my path. I knew that I was going to follow and practice this path the rest of my life. It was, but I knew that was coming home to this is my path. And I wanted to know, just like a lover, you want to know everything about them, and I want to know everything about the Dharma. And the opportunity arose with my teacher saying, "I'm going to be going to Burma, and I'm going to invite you to come, and you can meet my teacher. And if you want to ordain temporarily as a Buddhist monk, we can make that happen." And like, yes, that's all, because and again, my history. This is coming out of this awareness of death and being lost, and what is this life, and Vietnam War, and questioning consciousness. And so when I got into the Dharma, as one person says, like in our culture, like no one hardly even talks about death and aging and illness, and it's kind of was denied at the time, even in the hospitals, until the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross kind of named, people are dying there. So
Yes.
but anyway, when I got into the monastery, and got into just practicing with Dharma practitioners, that's what everybody was talking about, was illness, aging, and death. Like, this is my people. like no one anywhere else is talking about that. Like, just that, don't talk about this. But like, that's all they were talking about, is aging, illness, illness and death. And it's like, these are my people. These are my people. And I want to just hang out with them, and I want to learn everything, and particularly in the forest tradition. So I wanted to ordain. I wanted to experience this, and yes, part of this training was we would go to the cemetery in the middle of the night and meditate on death. And like, this is just like, yeah, this is what I wanted to just immerse myself in. And then the 32 parts of the body meditation on elements, like really diving into, like, what is this life? Like, here was this whole thing about diving into the mysteries and trying to understand what is this life. And so I was so, there's nothing more that I wanted to do, was to be immersed in this. And then I had the opportunity to stay in the monastery as a lay person. I was actually, in Burmese, I was called a kapia, the one that makes it allowable, the one that supports the monks and the monastics. And so I stayed there for many years, and helping to care for the monks, and then doing a lot of intensive practice. And then my journey led elsewhere, to eventually leaving the monastery and getting married, and being more part of the world, which I'm very grateful for. That there's so much to learn, being, for me, a husband, a father, a son, the life learning lessons. So yeah, and there's another whole story of how I left the monastery that I'll leave out. It's a long one, but just more waking up to what is this life.
Well,
So I was totally into it.
yes.
Stuff in the Dharma. And I have ever since. I mean, even though I got married and, MBSR, but I'm first and foremost a practitioner.
Hmm. Well, I know not just me, but so many are grateful for the path that you've chosen, for the path of heart awareness, openness, change. Truly grateful for you and what you have brought to this world, and continue to find myself feeling so blessed to have opportunities to be with you and at retreats. So thank you for everything you do, truly, and
Thank you. You're my.
how you are. Thank you, truly.
I look forward to
And
teaching with you too.
yes, I look forward to that too, absolutely. And if anyone's curious, we'll be posting that when it happens, so you can check out the links below for that. And how can people also reach you? I'll be putting whatever link, your website, or if people are
Yeah,
curious.
I think through the website, people,
Yes,
mindfulnessprograms.com, and you can there's a place where you can connect. So that's
correct. Okay, I'll include that below as well.
info@mindfulnessprograms.com.
Okay, I'll include that. Yeah. Anything else as we're ending that's uh,
Hmm.
on the heart and the mind?
I think just I think for anyone that's watching this, this grand invitation to become more aware of what it is that we have learned, so that we can begin to unlearn, to bring greater mindfulness and love into the world
Mm.
and into ourselves.
Mm. Yeah.
And thank
Thank
you
you.
very much for this time together.
Thank you. It went so quickly. I can feel I can have days of that with you. So thank you.